Hey guys, Happy New Year! The idea of this video is just to share with you about the games I have played in 2022 and for whom I would recommend these games, as well as more or less how long it takes to beat, strong and weak points. Beware that I play video games blindly, or in other words, without guides. Not every game I present here has a review yet, but they will, just in case you want to give it a check. And I would like to ask you, in which games are you interested for this 2023? So let's begin in order, with Need for Speed Most Wanted. This is what I will consider a classic racing video game, that is going to take around 30 hours to finish the main story, and many more if you want to go for all the trials, challenges and stuff like that. The versions that I have played are for the GameCube and PS2, but if you want to play something more up to date, there is a 2012 version. As strong points, it has solid gameplay, really good 2000 tracks in case you like metal, some rap and electronics, and a good level of customization. As weak points, it depends which kind of player you are. The graphics may look a bit or really ugly, as it is a 2005 game. Other than that, just slight issues regarding invisible walls and minor details. SMT5 is a game recommended for RPG players that enjoy a good challenge, as this game heavily punishes weaknesses, and if you go unprepared, it is going to feel like a really unfair game. Something rewarded here is to explore the overworld as much as possible to acquire new demons, get stronger fusions, and get access to special quests, which usually give you something nice in return. The main story takes around 60 hours, and if you want to complete it, around 80 to 90 hours. As strong points, I will say really good gameplay, extraordinary soundtracks, good open world. As weak points, it may feel as a hollow story, your choices don't really matter as older SMTs, and you might find a classic BS SMT moment. Rune Factory 4 is basically a Harvest Moon game with dungeon exploration elements. This is a game to actually chill unless you want to play it in harder difficulties, then it becomes into a brutal challenge at some points in the story. Most of the time you are going to be tending your farm and exploring the dungeons. The game is a good pace, but something that may grind your gears is the RNG for events. The main story, which consists in 3 arcs, may require around 80 to 100 hours if you play it without guides. As strong points, addictive gameplay, in case you like farming, good combat system, and good exploration. As weak points, terrible RNG for events. The 3DS version is worse, repetitive soundtrack, and later grinding made feel excessive in the third arc. Is 9 Monstrum Nodes is a fast-paced hack-and-slash with RPG elements. Perhaps not the most beautiful of games regarding looks, but really addictive gameplay. And if you feel it is just smashing buttons, then I recommend you to play it in higher difficulties, where it starts to matter more and more how you actually play. On this end, I will say that it has a solid gameplay, where it actually matters what kind of tactics you use. And don't worry about it being the 9th entry in the franchise. There are just details about characters that you may not understand. Other than that, it contains its own story. Depending if you do side quests and some research about the location of some items, it may require 40 hours. For strong points, solid gameplay, beautiful soundtrack, good RPG elements. As weak points, may look ugly for some, there are some FPS drops, just in the Switch version, and repetitive design. Metroid Zero Mission, a GBA game from 2004 with classic Metroid elements. It has a fast-paced gameplay compared to others in the franchise, a good non-written story about Samus Aran. It is going to take around 5 to 10 hours to finish the game, but also it is hard to measure if you want to get all the endings or finish it under a certain time, because there are some challenges, for example, finish it under 2 hours or with less than 15% of the items. As a strong point, it is a fast story, not much to read in-game. It also contains the original Metroid from the NES. There is a built-in mode for time attack. As weak points, on hard, or while trying to get a certain ending, the game may change from a walk in the park to be a really hard challenge. And getting all the endings potentially can get tedious. MegamanZero CX Legacy Collection. Here we have the whole MegamanZero saga, as well as CX entries. It is a good game to get if you want to have a good challenge and know the only freaking Mega Man saga with an ending. Beware that these are not particularly easy games, and in hard difficulty it brings an extraordinary challenge. If the end goal is just to finish the game, it may take around 3 to 4 hours per game, And of course, if you want to go for S rank, acquire all the items, it is going to take well over 60 hours. As strong points, many in one, good story, good soundtrack. As weak points, it's pretty much a copy-paste from the GBA, there are no graphical enhancements, and an unfinished CS story. Mary Skelter, Nightmares 2 and Finale are first-person dungeon crawlers with interesting mechanics. Some people feel like they are quite grindy. Personally, I didn't feel any of that in any of these games. The thing is using the mechanics to enhance weapons and get a decent party synergy, otherwise, yeah, it's going to turn into a hard game. Personally, I found Nightmares to be the biggest challenge if you want to get the true ending. These games do not have post-game content, and you will hardly require a guide, maybe just for Finale, as it has a convoluted map, where if you miss a small detail it may be hard to find, and the first two games may need around 60 hours, and Finale around 80 hours. As a strong point, good story, beautiful soundtrack, nice mechanics regarding classes and item acquisition. As weak points, perhaps a really niche genre, grindy according to some people, and dungeons are way too long, especially in Finale. Fire Emblem Three Houses, getting more and more popular since Awakening, turning into a dating simulator, but hey, as far as I am concerned, it still has a solid strategy gameplay. Where it feels like you are playing a medieval chess, it throws some new and interesting mechanics like gambits and way to promote your units without restrictions. Perhaps diminishing the factor of permanent loss with the chances to go back in terms, but hey, Engage is around the corner, so if you want to give it a try to the franchise, perhaps it is a good time to get this game and finish it. There are several paths depending from some choices, and it may require around 100 hours to finish all the paths. As strong points, solid gameplay, extraordinary soundtrack, refreshing elements without restrictions. As weak points, some parts in the story may feel like they need a stronger script, most choices don't really matter, and some activities are time consuming. Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, perhaps the game where I have spent much more time. It is a clunky hack and slash game with RPG elements and poor explanation to learn weapons, as well as kind of fear to be a hard game, where the story is not the strong of points. But once you overcome those hardships, it is a really good game, where you can farm countless hours unless you want to just focus in the main game, rush through everything, and you may need around 35 hours in the base game and something around 50 hours in Sunbreak. Beware that if you want to hunt the last monsters, it is going to take way more, once the 4th title update is released. As strong points, addictive gameplay, good customization, and faster pace compared to others in the franchise. As weak points, clunky as heck, time consuming to properly learn, and not really good stories. Trails of Cold Steel 4 is an RPG with interesting mechanics where position between characters makes the whole difference in several battles. Here, you'll need to learn how to synergize characters, magics, and skill to take the upper hand, at least in hard difficulties, otherwise you can more or less do whatever you want. At first, it's a story where you go from point A to point B, but later it opens several areas, letting you explore almost anywhere. Finishing the whole thing with ending and true ending is going to require around 120 plus hours, depending if you finish every single quest. And if this is your first time playing this franchise, it may feel like taking a lot, as there are countless references, characters and parts in its story, so I will strongly recommend you to play the games in order, as well as the older entries like Trails in the Sky. As strong points, solid gameplay, extraordinary soundtrack, intriguing story. As weak points, unnecessarily long game, lots of details to catch up to the story, and ugly animations. The Then Request 1 and 2 are RPGs from Idea Factory with solid gameplay, where you fight your enemies in a circle area. Learning when and how to use the bugs, as well as the glitch modes, are the key elements to smooth the difficulty in this game. The exploration is done in a third view, and you can use different characters with different attributes. In higher difficulties, this is going to be a key element, as every character learns different attacks, and exploiting every little weakness is going to be important. In the second game, you may feel a disconnection in the story, but it is explained in your second round, as well as in the last chapters. It should take around 40 hours and 20 hours. As strong points, really good story, nice soundtrack, solid gameplay. As weak points, a bunch of non-important information in the story, repetitive enemy design, not the best graphically speaking. Saviors of Sapphire Wings and A Stranger of Sword City are first-person dungeon crawlers with interesting stories and a good character customization, but these can also turn into a headache because in Sword City, if you don't specialize your units since the get-go, it is going to take a lot of time to tackle the post-content, as there is a good difficulty spike. Sapphire Wings has also a good customization level, and it is a first good step into the genre. Sapphire Wings is the classic story of light versus darkness, and Sword City is an isekai game that is going to feel like a Souls game for RPGs. And I wouldn't recommend you to start here unless you are someone patient who takes the time to read and understand game mechanics. Each main story takes around 60 hours, and the post-content, depending how you tackle, it can be well over 60 hours once again. As strong points, good stories, good soundtrack, extraordinary customization. As weak points, slow at first, unfriendly customization in Stranger of Sword City, and for some it may feel like an old RPG. Dragon Star Varnir is an idea factory game where you fight in different heights, and depending from the dragons you devour, you'll learn different skills that cover different areas and effects. This is going to be the main grindy part of the game, as you need to devour as many as possible to smooth the journey. Otherwise, there are going to be parts that are going to become quite hard due to the difference in stats. It has an interesting story, but has major flaws. The Switch version sometimes glitches to the point where, if this happens, you won't be able to proceed any further. The game takes more or less 30 hours to finish, and if you go for all the endings, you may need around 60 hours. As strong points, it is a good story, interesting gameplay, and nice farming mechanics. As weak points, glitchy, just the Switch version, not so good looking, and repetitive enemy design. Record of Lodoss War is a Metroidvania inspired in Castlevania Symphony of the Night. It has an interesting gameplay where you need to time the magic you use to avoid attacks, but also it is well rewarded, as it recovers your HP if it is in level 3. It has a beautiful pixelated art, and interesting level design in each region, but also it lacks a bit of the customization to change different parts of your characters. Here it is all about your main weapon, bow, and some magics. If you are well acquainted with the genre, it's not going to be a hard game, but also I believe it is a first good step in the genre. As a strong points, solid gameplay, interesting art, good challenges. As weak points, really short game, around 5 hours to have 100% of the map, and a forgettable story. For my cultural people, Moero Crystal H is a first-person dungeon crawler from Idea Factory, originally released for the Vita and then enhanced for the Switch, where you take the role of a farmer that visits the city, where he will be engulfed in an laughable story filled with jokes for adults. It is basically a Pokemon for cultured people, where you need to tear the character's clothes to make a rain of coins to proceed into this minigame with questionable sounds. Fascinating. Later this year, I'll release the review. The main game may require around 35-40 hours, and the post-content 20 plus hours. As strong points, interesting gameplay. Personally, I believe it has a good soundtrack and a laughable story. As weak points, basic dungeon design, repetitive design, and difficulty spikes, especially in the post-game. Horizon Forbidden West. I believe this one is well known, with an open world where you hunt machines here and there, and depending from the difficulty you can brute force your way, or you may require a bit more of thought while engaging machines. This one adds new elements like being able to fly, some underwater levels, but also keeps the well-thought mechanics of the first game. Story-wise, it makes some interesting twists, but I won't spoil anything, in case you haven't played. It takes around 35 hours just to focus in the main game, and well over 100 plus hours to complete it. As a strong point, it is a well-thought open world, good gameplay, and beautiful graphics. As weak points, some really predictable parts in its story. It can be grindy, finish all the quests, upgrade the stuff, etc, etc. And for the off-screen games, because I cannot record my 3DS, Etrian Odyssey IV. It is a first-person dungeon crawler where you create your whole party and adventure into a hellish journey, where small mistakes can pretty much wreck your whole party. It is definitely grindy if your team composition is not the best for boss fights. The main game takes around 50 to 60 hours. As a strong points, beautiful soundtrack, good character customization, interesting level design. As weak points, repetitive design, grindy, and small mistakes are heavily punished. And that's it. Let's hope for another interesting year, filled with interesting games. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.